I mean, this is going to be a bit different from, you know, what we have seen, and I'm sure we are going to see in this workshop, you know, a lot of like stochastic analysis and so on. But the fact is that in not only in computer science or other business, but in stocks, in quantitative finance, he has now become kind of common to start using, you know, machine learning models. No, we saw yesterday talk of Christopher Rainsing here about using neural networks, no, to solve or to help in solving, to help in finding the parameters of his stochastic differential equations, right? So the thing is that these models are considered like black boxes in the sense that you get an answer, but you don't know really how that answer was obtained, you know, because the inner workings of the model, you know, are kind of complex and follow. You know, it's not like a linear regression where you actually, well, through the coefficients, you can see which variable has actually been used more than others into getting the answer, right? So there are many measures for, or there has been developed several measures for knowing, you know, what these models variables and how the variables have impact that. But before that, you know, what the only measure or the most used measure that we have for knowing how good our learning model have performed is to see like the, you know, the error with respect to the real output. No, I mean, we train the models in a certain subset of our data, and then we test it on another subset of the test data that we haven't seen, and this is what is called the test set, and then where we know the true answers, and then we measure, you know, what the maybe I should change to here, okay, and then we measure, you know, by mean square error or mean absolute error, you know, how precise are our estimated value, you know, the y hat, with respect to the real value, the y, right? But these kind of measures, you know, which are the most often used since, and at least through the whole 20th century, you know, give us no information on the relation between the output and the features, you know, the variables that we have used, the information that we have used in to getting, you know, our answer, our estimated answer. And so they have no explanation on the results, right? So there has been very recent proposals, I mean, in this century, which tries to like replicate this idea, what I just said about the linear regressions, where we know from the coefficients of the linear regressions, which of these variables have been used the most or have been most important into getting the answer for in our model, right? So in these black box models, you try to like approximate their answers by trying to locally see, you know, locally approximate their values by the values obtained, you know, with some sort of like linear, small linear regression within the vicinity, you know, of your estimated values, right? And these are these proposals, which I will talk further on, you know, Lime, Deep Leaf, and Chapley, and so on. But the thing is that this gives you an explanation from the model point of view, because it's how the model have used this variable. But the thing, and here's my title, I want to go a step further and actually, I mean, we have wondered, all right, we have an explanation of how the model have used this variable, but has it used it well? I mean, has it really learned from this variable? Because so far, this is all relative to the inner workings of the model, right? So in order to verify this, you know, we also have other measures that are like model dependent. We can do, I mean, like, this is like typical feature selection measures that from the data, according to the nature of the data, we can then see what the variables that we're going to use are more relevant or not. Like, typical that one can do like, correlation analysis or principal component analysis to see which one of these could be more influential, before applying, our model. So this will, what I will call like a data explainer kind of algorithm, right? And the ones that we'll use after we have applied the model is that like these ones, like that's what we'll call model explainer, right? Okay, so this is it. So we, in order to verify the model's reliability, what we propose is to compare these two classes of algorithm. One does not depend on the model, the data explainer, which sees the relation between the input variables and the output directly without looking at, without applying the model. And then after you apply the model, see the relation between the inputs and the estimated output, okay? So, because our rationale here is that if the model learn something from the inputs, right, then there should be a similarity between the relation between the inputs and the true output, as given by our data explainer measures. So the measures that we get from looking at the relation between the inputs and the output should be similar to the relation that we get, the measures that we will get from our model explainer. That is the ones that give us some coefficients and value that tell us, something about the relation between the inputs and the estimated output. Okay, so our proposal is to like compute, we have the inputs, right? And we have our black box model that we train on this data. And before the training, through the training, we see the relation between inputs and outputs and true outputs, and then after we get the estimated values, we see the relation between inputs and estimated values, and we compute the similarity. So if the similarity is, sort of close, we can say that the model has really learned the relation expressed by the explainers. Okay, so different. So let me then just to put down some data explainers. All right, I'm not going to get into the formal definitions of this, just to give you the intuitive idea that people use. So data explainers, remember, these are the ones that tells me what are the relation between the inputs and the true outputs without applying, the model. So there is this one. Oh, sorry, I can see. You can see here the reference, right? By Peng Long Dean, they propose this minimum redundancy, max relevancy, all right, which considers a variable important that has large correlation with the response variable. And low correlation with the other variables, and uses the formal equation is like the mutual information between the important variable, the variable that we think is important for the output, right, and the output, and subtract from the contribution that you might get in terms of mutual information from the other variables, right? So you do this for each variable and see which one gets a better marginal contribution in terms of mutual information. So that's the basic idea, okay? And the relief is sort of something that's, but it's kind of an iterative process where you like start quantifying, this contribution of each variable to the, again, by doing some sort of like clustering, some closeness, some closeness to the variable, to the output variable in some sense, right? So this is the relief algorithm. So we have these two already well settled methods of explaining how good is the input, you know, with respect to the true output, right? In order to, just to, for example, okay, maybe this is an example that what will be, say, a data explainer in time series analysis, right? For say, for an ARMA model. This is something that I'm sure everyone is more familiar with. Well, that you do the auto-correlation test to see, you know, which lags of my variables, of my time series variables, right, are actually influencing my value today, right? So by doing, you know, the autocorrelation analysis, right, you know, the typical test of the ACF test or PACF test, then we'll say, oh, well, all right, variables at lag 3 or 4 or 5 seems to be, you know, in a causal relationship with the output, with the value of my time series today, right? So that will be like a data explainer in a time series scenario, right? Okay, and that's regardless of the model. Of course, this is what we'll do instead in order to apply an ARMA, but we also do this to at least have an idea of, you know, what past values of my time series are influential, and then we use this as information for, say, neural network models, if we were to use this neural network for predicting, for forecasting time series, which is one of the applications actually I'm going to show you in a minute. And now, from the point of model explainers, or as I said before, these are mostly local feature attribution methods. So there is one that is called LIME, Local Interpretable Model Agnostic Explanation, which produces an explanation by approximating the black box model with an interpretable model. For example, a linear model with a few non-zero coefficients, right? And so what you do is you perturb the original instance and see, you know, with respect to this perturbation, you know, how well, you know, a linear model applies within the vicinity, you know, of my of my output, right? And then there is one deep leaf, which is deep learning important features, which is specifically for neural network, right? And you just decompose the output prediction. I mean, the neural network proceeds by doing all this gradient descent, you know, backward propagation and then forward imputation. I'm not sure if the term is exactly like that, but I mean, you have to, like, you know, iteratively tune the weights of your neural network. So what this does is actually, you know, look at, you know, the path of weight tuning, and to see which neurons are exactly being used in getting the input from, I mean, going backward from output to input, right? So see what, you know, the path that, I mean, which inputs have actually gone through all paths through the network until the input, until you get the input. And the one that has been used most or most established is Shapley values, which is actually come from a coalitional game theory, and it's actually came from game theory, and it's a way of distributing, you know, a given payoff among a set of players in a fair way. And there is this axiomatic definition of being fair, right? Like, you know, if you contribute nothing to the game, I mean, or like the empty, or you have an empty coalition, so you get zero payoff, and the contribution should be additive. Like if you get more players into your coalition, then your payoff should increase, and so on. There are these other axioms that has been established in game theory, and it happens that the Shapley values are actually the ones that the only method that actually holds, I mean, verifies all these axioms, and so that's why it's the one that has been taken more into use. And actually, since this is the one that I'm going to be using and in this work, I'm going to take a little time to just go through or remind you, in case you already knew this, the formal definition of the Shapley value, right? So if you have a set of n players, right, and you have like the value function, for each player, which should be, which has the, for each, for each coalition of players, right? So the empty coalition gets 0 payoff. So the Shapley value is actually, you know, the marginal contribution of each player with respect to all the orders in which you can have coalition, no, joint coalition, right? So just by looking at this definition, you can see that this is computationally hard, you know, because you have an exponential number of possible coalitions, and precisely much research has been done in approximating this quantity. But it gives you, you know, a precise value, this Shapley value of the contribution that a player has to the game, to the coalition. A player has for the coalition. Now, in recent, this century, or precisely researchers like Lundberg and others brought this idea into machine learning, you know, where then in the machine learning, the payoff, you know, the V function is given by the prediction, and the players are the variables, no, our input variables. So in this sense, we are going, by using this Shapley value measure, we can see what's the contribution, you know, of each variable to the prediction, right? Okay, so this is again, you know, a point-wise sort of valuation, right? So in order to get like a general valuation for the whole model, and construct my model explainer, we look at then the mean of all these contributions. So if I have I apply, say, my Shapley value or any of my other local interpretations, measures, right? So I get my matrix of contribution for each, for all inputs, you know. I apply my contribution for each of my P variables, or P features, right? And then for each one of these features, you know, from J, from 1 to P, I compute the full contribution to the model by taking the mean of those values that I got for all the inputs where I tested where I computed my contribution, say Shapley value, or either the mean or the absolute mean value of this contribution. So that will be the model explainer built from these local attribution methods. Okay, and so we have my data explainer and we have my model explainers, right? And now how are we going to measure similarity? Very useful and regular similarity metric is just the cosine similarity, right? So in this case, the resulting similarity will be -1, meaning exactly opposite, or 1 meaning that they're exactly the same, or 0 that they are orthogonal or uncorrelated, and any value in between will an indication of their measure of similarity or dissimilarity, no? But you can use any other feasible similarity function. But this has, you know, some nice geometrical properties and it works fine for us. So this is the similarity metric that we're going to fix in order to see how close are the explanations, you know, in my explanation space from the data explainer that remember it measures, relation between inputs and true output, and the model explainer, which is the measure for the estimated values, right? Okay, so I guess this is what I just explained to you. So I guess okay, I already explained this and I have this slide prepared anyway. Okay, so my idea is to estimate the empirical distribution of the similarity by sampling from the test sets, all right? So, okay, so here summarize what I just said. Like, if we have the data explainer, okay, and from some local feature attribution, like Shapley or line, I construct my model explainer, and then what I'm going to estimate is the empirical distribution of the similarity, by sampling in my test set. And this is actually going to be done through this following procedure. So we have like this algorithm or method for assessing, how well my model has learned from the features or from the input variables that I use to get an estimated value of my, the estimated value that I want to learn, what I want to predict. Okay, so compute the data explainer, the value for the data from my data explainer in the testing set. I have, so these are the true values in my testing unseen values of my unseen process, right? And my variables, right? I compute my local feature attributions and compute and from this, select randomly number M of attributions and compute my model explanation, right? Okay, and then compute the similarity, say apply the cosine similarity, and then I repeat these steps, an n times. Okay, so so in the end, well, I get a vector that represents actually I get a vector of similarity values that represents the estimated distribution of the similarity function. I mean, I'm doing a bootstrap method here. And then I fix a threshold delta. I will say something about this in a moment. I fix my threshold delta that will indicate, what I consider to be similar, right? And so if my probability of these values S to be greater than delta is less than my, my significant level, then the model didn't learn the importance of features. Otherwise, the model learned the important features. All right. So this is my test for assessing if my model has actually learned, from the feature. I mean, if there is some similarity in between, the free model, the model free, I'm sorry, the model free, explanation, which is the data explanation, and the model explanation, the explanation which actually is relative to the model. Okay, so regarding the similarity threshold delta, I mean, we can just apply, some arbitrary values, like for cosine similarity, since values range between -1 and 1, I can say, well, anything above 0.8 is, can be regarded as to be very similar, okay? But that's arbitrary. And we can, well, try to relate these to some characteristics of either the modeling procedure or the variables. And one is like, there is this course of dimensionality threshold. So actually it's that to set my threshold proportional to the number of features according to this course of dimensionality principle, which actually says that, the error in my modeling increases with increase in the number of features. So if you have too many features, right, you are very likely to get, higher error. And that's why actually you want to do this feature reduction always, okay? So we set so with that in mind, no, we set our threshold delta to actually some minimum level. You can set up your minimum level, say 0.7, right? And then take the max between that minimum level, or 1 minus gamma p over 100, you know, by considering this idea of you know, of controlling, where p, remember, is the number of features. So sort of like taking a number that is related to the number of features. So as the number of features grows, you know, you actually, you know, forget about this. I mean, if it grows beyond a certain proportion, say beyond 0.8, no, then you just take your minimum level. Otherwise, you take your delta proportional to your number of features. I mean, if your number of features is low, then you can be a little more sharp and take, you know, higher values of delta. That's one criteria for delta. Another criteria is that, remember, we have a method, a measure that gives me explanation with respect to input and true outputs, and another that gives me measures with respect to inputs and estimated output, right? And one might wonder if I do this for several inputs, you know, and outputs, I mean, do the order of these importances, you know, is preserved, right? So we could care about this. We could say, well, I want to set up my threshold in a way that the cosines, you know, the similarities preserve the importance order of the variables, right? Or I may not care about this, right? So there are two criteria, and here where the cosine similarity, you know, can help us in getting a precise number. So by its mathematical form. So we can set the similarity threshold in such a way that the importance order of the variable is the same, right? Or no couple of variables have the same importance order. And for that, you know, this either of these two is just a solution of this optimization problem. No, we'll try to find the value, you know, x star of the cosine similarity by fixing, you know, say fixing the values of the model explainer and finding the value for the data explainer, right? Such that in this case, you know, they also subject to this constraint, which actually says that the order is not the same, you know, just, you know, xi minus xj is negative, then xi and xj with respect to the model explainer, you know, should be positive in order to be less than or equal. And if we change this inequality, then we will be looking at the importance order of variables being the same, right? So the solution of this will give me my delta for either problem. So we do that, you know. So we have at least three criteria for more refined criteria than just taking an arbitrary threshold value, right? One's based on the course of dimension, and the others by either preserving the importance order of data explainer values and model explainer values, or not preserving this order. Okay, so let's go into with all this set up. Then now we got the tools, and now we're going to explain the problem of loan credit risk. I mean, this is the problem of, like, we get some characteristic of the client, you know, his income, the assets that he or she has, if he's married or not, all right, and so on. And then the banks decided to give him money, giving a credit, right, to buy a house or a car, right? And in the case that it denies it, then you have to explain to the client, why are you rejecting, you know, his application, okay? And here's where this explainability, you know, of machine learning models are very important. Actually, banks do want to include into their decision-making machine learning models. And one problem that they have due to regulation is that since they cannot explain why the model is taking certain decisions, they cannot really use it, formally, right? So this opens the way of like, well, banks starting to use more refined models to assess if somebody can deserve a credit or not. So our data set, contains like 16 variables of different characteristics of people, and my response variables is 0 if the loan is accepted and 1 if it's rejected. So we do, as always, some pre-processing to reduce this, 16 variables, this large dimension to those that are most relevant. You use some, say, lasso regression, or elastic neck to filter for the important variables, get, correlated variables, just, remove one of them and so on. And so we end up with a data set of 6 features, which is the interest rate, the long term, loan to value, the debt to income ratio, the borrower credit score, and the co-borrower, if he has a wife or husband, credit score. Now, as you always do in machine learning, your model, you train it with 75% of your data, and then you test it in the 25% of the data. In the training set is where you compute your model, your data explainer, and then in the test set, is where you apply your model explanation measures. Okay. And the performance of the models will be measured as is usually done by the accuracy, how well you accept or reject the credit, all right? So we train 2 models. So a support vector machine with a radial basis function as kernel, and a random forest. And now, according to the error measure, the accuracy, their performance is very similar, as you see. So this gives actually no information which of the models is the best, So and here's where our proposed methods come into play. So departing from the fact that both models performs equally, the better model will be that one that with a similar performance has learned better the importance of the variable. So we're going to find out which of these 2 models have learned have used the input variables, our 6 input variables, the best, and in which ways, okay? We're going to perform assess the importance of this variable by using as a model explainer the normalized mean absolute Shapley value, and as my data explainer, both methods that I exhibit, the mean redundancy max relevancy, MRMR, and the relief. And for the threshold, I will use my 3 criteria, so I will do experiments setting my threshold using my course of dimensionality criteria, or my similarity level over which the importance order is kept the same, or where the importance order is not maintained, all right? Okay, so here is actually then the similarity with respect of support vector machine and relief, and random forest and relief. So what you have here at the right side is the relief data explanation, and on the left side, and on the right side, the model explanation based on Shapley, on mean absolute Shapley value for the support vector machine. And here for the random forest. You can see, pictorial, that actually the similarity is best maintained for the random forest. And actually by computing my cosine similarity, we see that the similarity for the support vector machine is 0.876 and the random forest is 0.97. So random forest has learned the better from the data, and could be used better as prediction. But let's see how they use each one of the variables by just doing the Shapley analysis, the mean absolute Shapley analysis. The red bars correspond to the score that the variable got for the support vector machine, and the orange bar is for the random forest. So you see that the random forest sort of like uses, distributes is the values, you know, or uses the variables in a more like, let's say, consistent way, sort of like, well, both give the most important variable. Is actually, so I mean, here is an explanation that you could give to the client. No, you say, well, if your credit were not given, no, well, because say your borrower credit score, say, is the most important variable, and maybe is low. And here's where you can play like, okay, if I were to increase my borrower credit score, right? Then at what level, no, how much should I increase it in order to be accepted? So you can do that kind of simulation, right? With this setup, right? So you see that actually the support vector machine gives too much importance to the borrower credit score, right? And too little, say, to the loans, the value of the loans that the borrower has, all right, or his debt, you know, that the borrower has. Okay, so well, actually, yeah, and yeah, the loan term that the borrower has, and so on. So it looks that then the random forest, I mean, uses the variables in a more intelligent way. And now by doing my different thresholds, right? We see here that test one is passed by both models. You know? Here's the test one. Remember, test one was the, remind you, is the similarity level over which the importance order is the same. Test two is the similarity level under which no couple of variables have the same order. And the third is the course of dimensionality. So setting my delta, you know, my level of similarity for where the importance order is the same, both models pass it, right? If I set the similarity level, I'm sorry, the delta, the threshold, yeah, the threshold for, yeah, similarity level for with respect to not above which the order is not the same, no model has passed it, because actually the threshold is set up too high, you know, I mean, so it will be impossible to pass this test with this threshold. So we might overcome this by considering, you know, say as correct if the model explainer switches to variable whose importance scores is very similar. Okay, but so this was like an over estimation of, and in the case of test three, which is with respect to the keeping, you know, my threshold with respect to the number of features not being too large, right? Which is this case. So so keeping in line with the dimension of the model. Actually, only the random forest passed consistency. You see, is all with respect to the relief. You know, so the only random model, only the random forest, I'm sorry, passed the test, right? So random forest is a bit more consistent with my ways of setting up the similarity threshold. So turns out to be, you know, the best model with respect to not only precision, you know, but also with respect of learning, of using the input variables in a reasonable way, way. So, I mean, one can interpret, the single prediction being more aware that the model learned the importance of the features. Okay. Okay, here's the summary I just said. So the results clearly indicate as preferable model, the random forest being more reliable since it learned better the relations among the features expressed in terms of their importance of the prediction. So let's go to another application that people use a lot in time series is to actually predict, forecast returns. So I'm going to do this with a sort of recent model being used by known colleagues, which is the dilated convolutional neural network, all right? So we're trying to predict the returns of a time series with a dilated convolutional neural network, a model that's been proposed recently by Borovkin, Botlin, and Osterlee, where they propose a dilated convolutional neural network that improve supposedly other neural networks and the classical ARMA model, in forecasting the financial returns. However, I mean, as always, I mean, they show that the dilated convolutional network is better by doing precisely this error analysis, how good they predict, how good is their prediction with respect to the true value. But nothing is said if the dilated convolutional neural network is actually using, the lags of the series in order to make, in which way is using the lags of the series in order to predict in order to make their predictions, since actually that was the whole point of this model, no? That's supposed to learn better the long-term dependencies within the model. So our goal here is to apply our Shapley values, our model's planar analysis, to understand how much the model is using the lags of the time series. So we're going to compare the Shapley values of the dilated convolutional neural network and the standard convolutional neural network as our benchmark model or baseline model for within the neural network class of models on the SP500, just as they did. We're going to reproduce their experiment to verify if really the dilated convolutional neural network is learning better the lags of my series, right? So, okay, I'm running out of time, go very quickly. So convolutional neural networks are just neural networks that use convolutions for making their operations, all right? So here, the convolution is made on the input data, and there is the kernel that precisely makes the convolution with the to the features and creates this feature map, okay? So usually the kernel is much smaller than the input data. I mean, the idea is that this makes a reduction of the neurons that is being used within the neural network. And you apply it many times to get equivalent subset of the input. So here is an example of a two-dimensional kernel, right? And how the data gets reduced for the next step, and you get this feature map. So actually just take home this idea, no? The motivation of the convolution operation is to extract a small meaningful feature from the input and reduce drastically the memory requirements. That's actually the advantage of using this. And, there are some hyperparameters, well, among others, but of importance here is the stride, which is the step that the filter makes when scanning the input. And also you can add like dummy neurons, dummy units, in order to avoid when you do the convolution or the mapping from going from one layer of the network to the next. So in order not to go forward, not to look at forward values in the case of time series, but to keep, to respect the timeline. And here is where by doing this, this is what is called the zero padding. By doing this, then you avoid to looking at the future values to predict the present, right? And that's, with that padding, what you get is what is called a causal convolution. And then the dilated coefficient is just, how the width that you will apply into this padding in order to jump, make jumps and reproduce this lag, that you will get in the series, to lag your input information, all right? So in order to just look back at 2 periods or 4 and so on. Okay, so maybe a picture's worth 1,000 words. So this will be my standard convolution, right? This is what it looked like. As you see in the blue line says the input, and you can see that actually you get like, you're looking at the future, in order to get, past values, right? And by doing, the padding, when you do then the convolution, you get the Gaussian convolution, where you see that no future values, can be used in order to get the new values within the neural network, right? And by padding further, you get this dilation, right? So you see these inputs that have not been used in gray, right? So you get different dilation, which sort of reproduce, and here's where the dilated convolutional neural network then start to have this long memory from the data, okay? So, okay. And precisely what is the receptive field is the subset of the input that affects a given output unit, and you can compute, how, and this has to do with the capacity of, memorizing the past. So with the receptive field, you can actually, compute it for any CNN with this formula, where, RL indicate the receptive field, F the kernel length, and D the dilation coefficient for an output unit of the Lth layer. Okay, so just keep with this. I do not remember this formula, but just to let you know that there is a way of computing knowing this, the receptive field, and this is what is going to distinguish the typical CNN from the DCNN. By having a larger receptive field, you're supposed to have a longer memory, okay? So our experiment is we're going to build the Borovkin-Osterley et al. Dilated CNN for time series prediction. Let XT be a one-dimensional time series, and L the number of layers of the network, ML the number of filters applied to the layer, and DL the dilation coefficient. And just as they do, we use DL, different value for DL ranging from 2 to DL minus 1, right? So a typical feature map when convolving from inputs into the first layer will look like this, and then you sort of recursively apply this. So the feature map from layer to layer will look like this. So we set, just as they do, the number of filters is set to 32. The activation function, the activation function is the ReLU, from going from layer into layer. And my loss function will be the mean absolute error between the one-step prediction and the actual value. And we apply 5 convolutional layers. Okay? So this is like a deep neural network of depth 5. And here is our 2 models. So the dilated CNN will have these dilations. So it will be a true dilated CNN. And just by setting all dilations to 1, you get just the standard. I mean, this is no dilation, just the standard CNN. Okay, in this case, according to the formula, I show you the receptive field is pretty high for the CNN, and the receptive field for the regular CNN is just 5, Then the 5 depth that the neural network has. So we train the network multiple times, and we set up we test other range of parameters, different epochs, different batch size, learning rates, so on. Okay, and now we train our models, both models in the SP500 index monthly returns from 1900 to 2012, and train the model in 75% of the observation and test on 25%. And here are the results. Again, with respect to performance, performance errors result. You see, from the root mean square error or the mean absolute error, we see that they're pretty close. Again, they seem to perform the same. So, if you do this test, you really have a hard time saying, well, that the dilated CNN have done any good. No, the dilation have improved the model just by a little bit. The authors then go on and do other testing, like, well, just as Wynn showed us, you can do a sort of like a portfolio simulation, trading a simulation and see what's the maximum drawdown and the cumulative return. And yes, the DCNN got you, but really some marginal gains, really. And they tested it. Well,
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, because I tried to tell you that you have the last 5 minutes because it is 11.
Okay. I'll finish.
Sorry for interrupt. I didn't know how to tell you.
I wasn't looking. I guess I turned off your screen. I wasn't seeing you. If you were making.
Sorry.
Anyway, I'll rush through. So, with respect to performance error, they look the same. So what about then applying our Shapley values? So we see that, both models, again, let me make this, the DCNN is orange and CNN is in red. And you see that both models do recognize that the first lag is important. That's usually the case, right? But then, as we amplify the lags, you see that the CNN, it gives too much importance to far away lags, which is ridiculous, and whereas the DCNN is actually using more intelligently the past values, right? And so on, and this improved with the 60 lags. The way that the DCNN uses this past value is in a more uniform manner than does the DCNN. The DCNN is, is here giving, let me amplify this for you, it's giving you it's looking at the past, giving too much importance to lagged values, at 45 days, a month ago. So that's not really reasonable, right? If we look at the standard deviation, of these mean absolute Shapley values for the CNN and the DCNN, we see that the standard deviation of the mean is too high, it's too much concentrated, right? And for each one of these lags that we tested the model, right? So in conclusion is that, here I summarize, so the winner is DCNN, because actually in the 20 lag case, the standard deviation of the CNN seems to be smaller, but this can be due to the fact that the number of lag is not sufficiently large with respect to the receptive field. Remember we have a large receptive field, so to exploit the DCNN, we have to exploit the long memory attribution. So when we extend the number of lags, the result is the opposite. For the DCNN, the standard deviation of the mean absolute Shapley value is smaller. So suggesting that the latest CNN is able to use more past data and learn really the long-term dependencies, thanks to the larger receptive field, which was what we wanted to confirm, that it's actually, it was using the long-term dependencies in a more intelligent and consistent manner than any other regular neural network. Okay, so what we have shown with this methodology that we can actually help users to have a more complete understanding on the problem of attribution. You know, that is to verify if the model attributions are reliable, you know. And what has to be done in the future is actually this customization of the data explainer, of the model explainer. I mean, I have used two data explainers and, you know, say the Shapley value-based model explainer, but my data explainer were the relief and this MR, and actually the relief seems to be more connected to the model explainer in the sense that, you know, the philosophy which underlies this construction of this model, this explanation method should be in line in some sense, right? I mean, I do have extra slides on that, but I don't have time to show it to you. I can just pass you that. And the other is, well, and the other thing is, well, that I had is the computation of Shapley values, you know, the precise estimation of Shapley value. But that's it, but I guess I have no more time and I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Argimiro. And maybe we have a few minutes for comments or questions. I think it is a topic that is pretty much update.
I have a question, but of course more general, not to the. What's in your opinion is the applicability of statistical methods in finance? So on one hand, you've got the late Steve Ross, who said that statistics cannot be applied in finance, not at all. He stated in his book. And on the other hand, you've got the current, maybe I could call it even fashion, to use machine learning, artificial intelligence, what in fact is statistics. So we mathematicians call it statistics. So just a comment, please.
Well, I mean, I see my first self using a lot of statistics and trying actually to formalize. I mean, here in this talk, you saw that my method, you know, is sort of like a bootstrap method for this computing this similarity, and then I'm trying to test how precise this similarity is, and so I do need. I mean, actually, this should. I think further work should be actually do an actual what's it called? A statistical test of the goodness of it, you know, of this test. So I mean, so far it's just being shown his goodness empirically, but of course there's a lot of statistics that I'm not really actually professional. But thank God I'm married to a statistician who actually corrects me and helps me, give me a hand on.
Sorry to interrupt you, but by the word statistics, I don't mean mathematical statistics, but statistics in broader sense, so data science, so let's call
it. You mean like, well,
dealing with data.
Empirical statistic, okay, like actually collection of data and so on.
And inference, so not necessarily mathematically rigorous.
Well,
but this is what we do in machine learning. So
yeah, I mean, a statistician will call machine learning, you know, statistical learning, right? So this, all the part that you use all this empirical analysis and the way you set up your experiments correctly. I think it's.
And what Steve Ross used to claim was that there is no repetitive experiment in finance because finance, the money is alive. It comes from stupid, it goes from stupid people to clever people. So the mechanism changes every second. So this is what, for instance, Cliff Asness said that, okay, you may use all the statistical methods which you know, so ARMA, RIMA, GAT, but under one condition, that you don't exceed the time horizon equal 1 second. So within 1 second, statistics is all right, but for longer time periods, you've got that mechanism, that the mechanism changes.
Mm.
It's an opinion, so not even not mine, just a statement. So
okay, opinion taken. We try to always...
from various discussions. So Steve Ross has written a book on that. So it's called Neoclassical Finance.
I see. Okay. Wow. Okay. I didn't know about that. I take note also of that book.
So the guy who didn't get Nobel Prize for the same reason as Fisher Black. So
I see. Okay.
Okay, it was just a comment. So
okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Darius. And if there are no more questions, I suppose we can have our coffee break together or alone and meet again 11:30 with the third speaker of this morning. So thank you and clap, clap to our speaker.
All right. So see you there later.